And good Thursday morning, everyone. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. I appreciate so much you being with me. And by the way, thanks so much for the emails, some asking some more questions, some making comments, etc., 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 about my short series that I'm doing on the Lord's Supper. You know, opponents of covenant eschatology say, well, if you believe the Lord came in AD 70, you must believe that communion has ceased, that we aren't supposed to take the Lord's Supper. And I'm giving some of the reasons why I think that's not necessarily a false claim. And by the way, let me remind you, I produced a 14-lesson series on the Lord's Supper. Its background, its significance and meaning, and why I believe it's perfectly justified for us to participate in the Lord's Supper today. You can go to my website, www.eschatology.org or bibleprophecy.com, find the series on the Lord's Supper. When you order it, make sure that you mention that you saw the, pardon me, saw the offer on YouTube, and I will refund the shipping. So be sure to take advantage of that. I've got to tell you, one of the funniest things about this whole issue is the opponents of covenant eschatology say, see, Paul said you're supposed to take the supper until the Lord comes. Therefore, if the Lord came, we must not take the supper today. And they go to 1 Corinthians 11:26. As often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you do show forth the Lord's death until he comes. And what's interesting about that is that the majority of people who make that objection admit the Lord came in AD 70. Okay, the question is for those people, how do they know from the context of 1 Corinthians chapter 11 that Paul was not, as a matter of fact, talking about the coming of the Lord in AD 70? In other words, and let me make it clear that I believe, as I've been sharing with you, I believe it's perfectly legitimate for us to take the supper today, but the argument is the supper would only last until the coming of the Lord. Okay? Those who make the objection agree the Lord came in AD 70. Well, if you agree the Lord came in AD 70, then how do you know that the coming in of the Lord in AD 70 was not the coming of the Lord that the supper was to endure until? You see, what that basically means is the objectors have really entrapped themselves logically into saying they are the ones who really ought to be arguing that the supper ended in AD 70. Look at what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. All you have to do, folks, is look at Paul's use of the personal pronouns. Should I praise you? Is Paul speaking timelessly? When you come together, it is not to take the Lord's Supper? I will not praise you. Is Paul talking timelessly of the church throughout time? No. Paul's dealing with a very, very specific historical circumstance in the first century church. And writing to the same identical you, Paul said, as often as you eat this bread and you drink this cup, you do show forth the Lord's death until he comes. So, if the argument is going to be, oh, well, the supper only endures until the coming of the Lord, then if we're going to honor the context of 1 Corinthians chapter 11, Paul was talking about, watch this, you, first century Christians, first century Corinthians, you show forth the Lord's death until. The Corinthians were going to live until the day of the Lord that Paul is talking about. Once again, Paul's not talking timelessly. You see the problem? The question again is, how do the detractors of covenant eschatology know that Paul was not in fact talking about the supper enduring until the coming of the Lord, which they agree occurred in AD 70? So the challenge to my friends who oppose covenant eschatology and who say, oh, well, the supper was only supposed to endure until the coming of the Lord, produce the proof that Paul had a different coming in mind in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 from the coming that was to occur in the lifetime of the Corinthians. Where is the proof? See, the burden of proof is not on me at this point. The burden of proof is on those who say, oh, well, Paul's not talking about AD 70. He's talking about a different coming of the Lord. Where is the proof? Hey, thanks for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings. We'll see you on the flip side.